Hey all, this is Darren, head of remote at GitLab, and today I'm being joined by Sid, our founder and CEO, and we're having our first ever all remote office hours. And so this was conceived after our iteration office hours where people can bring challenges or kind of thorns in their side or questions or concerns about working remotely. And if they've seen other companies do this better, if they have instances where they want to improve their work and life as a remote employee, we wanted to open this up for folks to bring questions. Sid and I have both been working remotely for combined many decades, I guess you could say. And so we have one question there from Ren. Ren, do you want to verbalize that or do you want me to read that out?
I can verbalize. That's fine. Hi, everybody. So, as someone that's neurodivergent, having autism, ADD, and dyspraxia, working remote has been a huge improvement for my quality of life over the 5 years that I've been working remote. And I was wondering if there are any plans in the works at GitLab to amplify how remote work can be a benefit for those that are that have disabilities or that are, like myself, are neurodiverse. I'm going to be writing a Medium blog post about this, but I was wondering if there's anything at a company-wide level.
You want me to take that, Sid? I have a thought on that. My initial thought is the Medium blog post may actually be great fodder for starting up a handbook page. So as a part of the all remote handbook, I've written guides on like a comprehensive overview of what asynchronous looks like. Because asynchronous can mean different things to different people, and I think it's good to put context around what it means for us and for GitLab and kind of how we've seen it work out. And having you on the team gives us a unique ability to be an authority on this. And so this is in the spirit of GitLab. I think if we have people on the team that can offer up expertise in a certain area, we should take advantage of that. And so what I would recommend is, hey, come to me, let's talk about maybe making this into a handbook page because we want it to be as useful as possible to the broadest amount of people as possible. And also, if we put that out there in handbook form, we can give other companies and other people the ability to contribute to that and build that out. And part of my vision is for the all remote handbook to not just be something that GitLab creates, but we create sort of this home base where everyone else wants to contribute to it and make it the world's best repository on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna second that, and it's great. Like, we want diversity, and neurodiversity is one of the things we want to encourage and be inclusive to people. I think a Medium post is a great way to start. I think I struggle with kind of creating a handbook page out of thin air because remote is not a panacea for working with neurodiverse people, but there's some benefits that it offers. So I'd love to see where kind of that line is. Where does it help? Where doesn't it add a lot? And I think I'd love to see other people's opinions on that, and then if we have a couple of blog posts, we can aggregate that into a handbook page of what we think.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Jean, do you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, sure, thanks. So as a veteran of remote work, I was hoping you could name some of your top tips for making remote working successful. As somebody that was new to all remote, when I joined GitLab, I did a bit of research, spoke to other people, and obviously got some tips that I employed to help me adjust. But I was wondering if you can maybe name your top tips for what you use to make remote working successful for you.
So do you want to lead that one or you want me to?
Sure. I'll be happy to lead. In general, like working asynchronous, which is even tougher than working remote, but like write things down. As far as personal tips, like I love having a good setup. I love having a door I can close and creating some separation. And I love stopping work at 6 p.m. and then not checking Slack afterwards.
All great tips. It's interesting. One of the things I was going to say is workspace is so essential, and I think it's one of the things that's most commonly overlooked. Because if you look at what the stereotypical view of a remote worker is, Maybe there's a laptop on a beach, or they're out on a cabana somewhere, or at a table at a coffee shop. For me, the ideal space, I need a door with separation, and I even recommend in one of our handbook pages to consider a busy or available indicator outside your door. You could even program like a hue light with a trigger in your office so that your family outside knows if they're welcome to come in or not. It helps create that border. And in an office, you kind of have that natural distance, but when you're in the same home as family, it's something that has to be reminded and reiterated time and time again. So I like to, the workspace, I would say, put a lot of effort in the workspace and make sure that you iterate on that, and it feels like a place that you can be focused and you're comfortable. And this is what I love about GitLab reimbursing for co-working spaces or external offices, because for some working from home, that's not their ideal place. And if you found that you're struggling to work from home, I would encourage you to try out a co-working space or an external office and reimburse for a month. Like, just kind of see how it goes, experiment with your workspace, change your monitors around, change your equipment around. It's workspace is essential for me to kind of get in that groove. Did you have any other? I want to make sure I could go on for hours on top tips, but are there any areas in particular that you wanted me to hone in on, John?
No, I think it kind of like correlates with the kind of like tips I got. I'll maybe verbalize some of the other tips I got. The one thing is act as if you're still going to work. So get up in the morning, get dressed, shower, take care of yourself as if you were going out. Establishing some sort of routine is helpful, so that these are your hours and stuff. The separation between kind of like work and personal life was something I struggled with initially. And what I've started doing was leaving my phone in my office when I end for the day, which has been just kind of like a cue to help me kind of like disconnect as well. And yes, the busy, not busy sign, I actually have one of those. There's actually a red sign on that door right now there. So when my doors close, and I use that there's a red and a green to indicate to my kids, if I'm on a call. They're 5 years old, so they tend to ignore that sometimes, but it's a work in progress.
No, understood. Yeah. And one thing I'll mention on the routine, that's a pretty common thing to hear. And I think that is very true in a synchronous space. If you're going to stay locked to working hours, especially in a hybrid scenario where you have people going into an office for certain hours, and so you're working remotely, you're trying to match those hours, it does make sense to consider a routine such that you're kind of ramping into work and then ramping out of work. But one of the things that I encourage people to do in a fully asynchronous setting, like we have here at GitLab, is to really embrace the freedom that you have in that. And I'm actually going to stand up a handbook page on this soon, which is just open up a blank document, consider what you would do with your life every day if you weren't constrained with those hours, and imagine how it could be different. And I look at this as it's two things to investigate. What would a non-linear workday look like? And what would an off-peak lifestyle look like? How would you do things differently if you weren't constrained by the notion of time that you are at most companies? Now, this requires you to work really well asynchronously and to be a great manager of one if you're going to wildly shift your working hours. But it does enable you to make your routines different, potentially from day to day or week to week, and kind of shape shift your life so that you miss out on fewer things about life. And I find that makes me a much happier remote worker because I fully take advantage of being able to do things in life that you physically could not do in a co-located space. You generally are happier with the situation you have if you're maximizing what that is. And it looks different for every person, but a lot of it just starts with a blank document. Like, how could this day look if I didn't have the constraints of time? Cool. Erica has the next question. Do you want to verbalize?
Sure. What tips do you have on setting boundaries around synchronous meetings with coworkers? Something I've noticed is that as we grow, more people are exposed to remote work for the first time, and it can be easy to default to meetings over async communication, likely just because it's what they're used to. And then I'm going to vocalize the second piece of this because I think they'll probably go together. But on that thread, what tips do you have for adjusting to async over synchronous communication?
You want to lead that one, Sid, or you want me?
You can have first stab.
Okay, cool. It's tougher. I've noticed that even as GitLab has scaled, defaulting to synchronous, you almost have to kind of step in and manually stop it from happening. Because my guess is that people come from environments where meetings are the default to get anything done, and consensus gathering and decision making are merged into one unit of time. And so breaking that apart is not natural. What I like to do is bring up documents and asynchronous pieces of material, a merge request or an issue, in the Slack chat or in the calendar invite, as like, can we do this through an issue or a merge request? Is it possible to do this in an asynchronous way? Has that even been considered? And then that's a discussion. And maybe the answer is no, like maybe it would be more efficient to do this synchronously. But what I try to do is ensure that there is a burden on the meeting, such that like the meeting organizer, if they're insistent that this meeting has to happen, the organizer should be on the hook for documenting and contextualizing takeaways, not just in the Google Doc that's attached to the calendar invite, but in the respective handbook pages. So either they need to do it themselves or have someone on their team as a scribe to ensure that the meeting benefits more than just the people that are in the meeting. And you have to just implement those forcing functions even when it feels weird. Otherwise, meetings just become the default. I feel like it's kind of like a wave you have to continually push back because there's always new hires coming in that are used to doing it meeting first. And there's almost always an excuse to be made of why this one thing needs to be a meeting instead of async. And I'll agree, async is not always the easiest way. I just think it's the most inclusive way and the most efficient way long term. So it's worth the extra effort, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And it's especially about like the natural thing to happen is like to have more and more meetings. I think the best way we have to keep things asynchronous is the DRI principle. You do the work, you can make the decision after asking for input, and you make an issue or merge request that serves as asking for input. I think the reason to call a meeting is if you don't get enough input, or if you require input and you want to make it easier on the people giving input. A meeting is kind of, although it's kind of easier. Like for me, it's easier to jump in a meeting and just say something than have to think about it more thoroughly and put that in a text field. So I think if you're not getting the feedback you need on a proposal, we should have a meeting to review that. And I think in many cases, people kind of have an idea of what they want to do. They do want to open it up for questions, but then if there's not a lot coming in, great, I'll just go my merry way and don't bother with it. In this case, today I had a couple of meetings that were for kind of an approval process. It was about acquiring other companies potentially. They need signed off. We need a lot of context really quickly. It's easier for me to have the meeting. It's not necessarily easier for the organizer. They've done a good job preparing with a document, so it can be a 25-minute meeting where it's a pretty complex proposal. Could have been a 2-hour meeting in another company if we wouldn't have used that document. So that helps. But I think in general, have a meeting when you want more input. If you don't need more input, maybe not have the meeting.
Yeah, and I'll just close by saying one of the things that I've been talking with companies that are finding themselves sort of forced into a sudden work from home arrangement. A lot of them try to just copy and paste their boardroom schedule to a Zoom schedule without giving themselves permission to think through that, like, does this actually need to be a meeting? And so if you just kind of train yourself to always think before I pull the trigger on this calendar invite, it's like, is there any other way to do this? Is there a better way to do this? Because what always slows me down is if I have this meeting, I'll spend the time in the meeting and then I'll also have to go document it in an issue or elsewhere. And that feels like double work. So can I just start the work where it's going to eventually end up? But again, that's rewiring your brain, and also kind of using that forcing function of, I don't want 2 plates of work. I'll just take the one, and we'll just jump straight to that. Elsa, do you want to verbalize your question?
Yes, I will. And just following on from what you were saying before, I mean, I've been in meetings where I've seen, or in calls where I've seen Sid immediately create a merge request for something when something comes up. And I try and do that during my meetings. If it's something that you can action straight away, just do it during the call so that you don't have to then take time after the call to take those actions if you can avoid that. But yeah, my question was, as we're all remote, everything's written down at GitLab, and I really struggled with feeling like I had to read everything to know what was going on at the company, and ended up really not spending enough time doing what I should have been doing day to day. So what advice would you give to new joiners on where to go first? And then Jessica also added a little bit to that. Do you want to vocalize yours, Jessica?
Sure. Yeah. I saw your question, and it was a lot similar to what I was thinking. As a brand new team member, I've been reading a lot, and I love to read, but I was thinking about people who may not love to read, or who may not process information in that way. Do we find that communication challenges arise in those situations?
You want me to take the lead on that, Sid?
Yeah. Well, the one thing I was thinking about is that it's so tempting at GitLab. You can see everything to start looking at everything. And we're not going to measure your input. So we're not going to tell you, hey, maybe don't read the change log or the handbook. Maybe don't read every single Slack channel. But that's on you. And I don't think we do a great job of communicating like, hey, you'll be exposed to a lot more information than you ever can consume or have to consume to do your job. So please be mindful and don't become an information addict, because you can have a full-time job just keeping up with all the things that GitLab is doing. And I don't think we ever call that out. So might be something we want to add to onboarding or something like that. So if someone has an idea, I'd love to, please do speak up.
Yeah, I want to say I worked with onboarding to make one iteration of the template. I need to go back and make sure it's that definitive and thorough. But essentially, one thing that we did up level in the onboarding template is there is actually a guide now on how to effectively search the GitLab handbook like a pro using all available mechanisms. Some people like the search bar that's in it. Some people like to use Alfred. Some people like to use a bookmarklet within Firefox or Chrome. And it's a pretty comprehensive guide on digging into it in a way that suits you best. But I think the overall thought is, if you move into a new home and you get a new internet connection installed, as soon as it comes online, you shouldn't panic that, oh, I don't have time to read the entire internet. You just know that you can Google it when you need it. And I think largely the same thought applies to the GitLab handbook. It's something that we should be grateful for, that it's as big and encompassing as it is. And so instead of being daunted by it, just sort of let it lie. And when you need it, it'll be there. And then if you go search for something and it's not there, that's a trigger that I should document whatever the solution is to whatever I'm curious about, because I want the next person who has this exact same question to find it, sort of pay it forward with that link. And Jessica commented the search guy was in her onboarding issue. Okay, great. So that is in there, but we may need to be a little bit more explicit on giving people permission to not feel guilty about being unable to read the entire handbook during onboarding. I'm in the handbook all day, every day, and I am certain there are sections of it that I have not read yet. I do want to address Jessica's second question on styles of learning. This is an interesting question. A few months ago, I did a sort of live learning webinar within GitLab on effective communication, and we looked at all of the different ways people like to learn, visual, auditory, textual, and everywhere in between. And we actually did that in video form, and it dawned on me afterwards that some people may not like to learn by watching this video. And so I contextualized it and wrote out a new handbook page so you could learn it. Now you can learn it 2 ways. You could watch that video and listen, or you could read the page and not have to have any audio. You could take the information in that way. In an ideal situation, there would be multiple ways to take in all of the information. But I will say, to work well at an all remote company, I think some amount of passion for reading and appreciation for self-service and self-learning. I don't know if it's necessarily required, but your life will be a lot easier if it's something you appreciate. And I feel like that is fairly well established even at the jobs FAQ. Like even if you're at the earliest stage of do I even want to apply here, it strikes me as pretty clear early on that you're going to be doing a lot of reading and writing if you want to work here. And I think the flip side of that is there are some in-office environments that are very high context and it's very verbal. And you need to know going into those interviews that that's going to be the main mode of conversation. And you either are going to love that and thrive in that or not so much. And I know for me, being passionate about writing things down means that I do better here because that's the default of how we get things done. So in an environment where that was not the default, I would struggle, whereas some people would thrive in that. Sid, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I have nothing to add.
Thanks. That's a great answer.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So we have no more questions in the document, but we have quite a few people on the call. Does anybody want to verbalize something and then we can document from there? Sid, I'll ask one question to you, and then I'll have to document it and practice what I preach. I'm curious if you've had any conversations with people, especially in recent days, that have come to you and have said, we are now remote or we're now working from home, and this is our biggest problem. Like, what would you advise? Have you heard any questions that have come to light that you think would be useful for us to have top of mind?
No, I haven't heard yet from other people. I think, well, I've heard a couple of things. I think audio is the biggest problem. Good microphones, people muting themselves. And I remember that from the early days of GitLab. So I think early on, the audio issues are pretty severe. People need to get external microphones. People need to learn how to mute themselves. And also video on, like people dialing in without turning their video on is probably a problem. I think the next big problem is you go asynchronous, which none of the companies now having to use remote all of a sudden will probably do, because that's kind of changing the entire way you work. And then probably working handbook first is the hardest problem to solve.
Yeah, agreed. And the interesting thing about handbook first is that's almost a business problem. It's less like that's an issue co-located or remote, and I'm seeing that as well. A lot of the foundational things that help us work well would be useful in a co-located space as well. They just tend to become remote problems because without them in a remote setting, there's really no band-aid solution to getting that done. Awesome. Last call for any other questions. Anyone want to verbalize? Otherwise, we can wrap up early.
Darren, I was just going to add, sorry, I came in late. I was going to add to your thing that I always say that. I say that all remote has forced us to do things that any company would want to do, like write down decisions, write down process. We have to do the things that everybody aspires to do.
And as an expert remoter yourself, I'll ask you this. Do you have any tips that anyone on the call may benefit from?
Again, I joined the call late, so sorry about that. But this is really cool that you put it together. My number one tip is creating a separation between life and work. That can be really hard. I always say that I'm really lucky. I've got a basement. Sid's lucky he's got an extra room. But even if it's a curtain, making some way to separate your work and your life is, I think, critical, because otherwise you never feel like you're not at work. So that's critical for me. It's critical for my family. I've got young children. They need to know when I'm at work and when I'm not. So it makes it everyone's expectations aligned, including your own internal ones, to make sure there's separation.
Agreed. That actually came up earlier, so there's definitely something to that. I think I'll make an iteration to the workspace page to double down on that. Well,
Darren,
yeah, go
so
for it.
I joined late. I apologize. I'm really glad that you set this up. I see that it's being recorded. Where will this recording be posted so I can hear what I missed?
Yep, it'll be on GitLab Unfiltered, and we will put the eventual link in the agenda doc as well, so you'll find it there.
Awesome, thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for jumping in on short notice. This was really fun, and we'll try to keep these going. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to jot them down. That way we'll have them top of mind for the next time we do this. And after we close, I'll upload this to GitLab Unfiltered and share the link around. Have a great day. Thanks all.
Thank you.